Apple just dropped the budget phone of iPhone 16 lineup, and as always, the Pro models get all the hype. But is the camera really that much better, or can the cheaper iPhone 16e and the regular iPhone 16 hold their own? And in this test, we are going to test everything from daylight to nighttime and portrait photography. We also have a special guest today.
This is Sparta.
Now let's check the selfie camera on iPhone 16 Pro Max, on iPhone 16e, and also iPhone 16. Now we are checking the microphone on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Let's check how the microphones and sound quality is on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Then we are checking the selfie quality and also the microphone on the iPhone 16e, how the sound quality is on the iPhone 16e. And now we are checking the sound quality and the microphone on the iPhone 16. So the main difference between the camera of these three phones is that the iPhone 16 Pro and iPhone 16 Pro Max has three cameras. There is an ultra-wide, a wide, and a telephoto sensor. On the iPhone 16, you only have one camera, the main camera. It is 23mm if I'm not mistaken. And on the iPhone 16, you have an ultra-wide, and also you have a wide sensor, the same size, not the same size exactly, but the same megapixel as the iPhone 16e. And not having the ultra-wide lens means you don't get anything like 0.5x on the iPhone 16e. In practical terms, this means that when recording a video, you won't be able to fit as much into the frame on the iPhone 16e. You can see this in the middle of the screen with the iPhone 16 Pro on the left and iPhone 16 on the right. The same goes for photos. You can capture more dramatic shots in the city using the ultra-wide lens on the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro. This may not be a big deal to many people, but depending on your photography style, you may or may not feel the absence of the ultra-wide lens. Another use of the ultra-wide lens is macro photography, as its shorter minimum focal distance allows it to capture subjects up close. For example, to take this picture of a daisy, I had to use the main lens on the iPhone 16e from a further distance, otherwise the image would have been blurry. It depends on how often you take close-up shots, but I personally prefer having the option, even if I only use it occasionally. Of course, you can use the main lens on all phones to capture small objects like flowers, but you won't be able to get as close. One strange thing that I found about the iPhone 16e is that it does not have a cinematic mode, so you won't be able to play your background while you are filming, while on iPhone 16 and also iPhone 16 Pro or Pro Max, you will be able to do so. To me, it was a strange decision to remove cinematic mode from the iPhone 16e. The phone has a good processor and is fully capable of recording cinematic videos if needed. It feels more like Apple intentionally handicapped the iPhone 16e just to give an advantage to the other models in the 16 series. Fortunately, they did not remove portrait mode. Here, I took a picture of Tanya using portrait mode with the main lens on all three phones, and the results look quite similar. You can also record a video without portrait mode, and all models support up to 4K at 60 frames per second. I recorded this video in 30 frames per second. Additionally, the iPhone 16 Pro supports up to 120 frames per second in 4K. So between iPhone 16 Pro and iPhone 16, there are not much of a difference between zoom levels 1 to zoom level 5. I mean, of course, the iPhone 16 Pro has a larger sensor. So if you're in a low light condition, the iPhone 16 Pro is gonna take a better photo. But if you're in a bright condition, the difference is not that huge. As an example, I took a picture using 3x zoom on all three phones. If we look at the results, aside from the fact that the colors appear slightly more vivid on the iPhone 16e, the pictures are quite similar, at least in these specific lighting conditions, even though the iPhone 16 Pro has a better sensor than the iPhone 16, and the iPhone 16's sensor is better than the iPhone 16e's sensor. All three phones use a similar set of computational photography algorithms. This makes images taken from 1 to 5x zoom quite similar, even at around 4.5x zoom in a cloudy environment. It is difficult to see a major difference between the three phones. However, things start to change at 5x zoom, where the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max have a dedicated telephoto lens. Of course, even though there is no dedicated telephoto lens on iPhone 16e and iPhone 16, you can still zoom into the subject. It's gonna use a digital crop, as you can see here. I'm gonna zoom 5x into the subject and take a picture. At first glance, you might not notice much difference between the three photos at 5x zoom. But if we zoom in, you can clearly see that the iPhone 16 Pro has much better image quality and detail. The iPhone 16 also has an advantage over the iPhone 16e due to its larger main sensor. Another difference is that the iPhone 16e tends to have a slightly different image processing, making colors look different compared to iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pro at zoom levels. On top of that, I've noticed that the iPhone 16e often applies more sharpening to compensate for the lack of optical detail in photos. In some situations, the iPhone 16 Pro's telephoto lens produces a slightly muted colors, lacking the warm tones seen on other iPhones, as in this example. Another thing to note is that if you zoom beyond 5 times, like in this 10 times zoom example, the difference between the three phones become even more noticeable. That said, we shouldn't overstate these differences because, surprisingly, the iPhone 16e and iPhone 16 can still produce decent zoom photos at 10 times thanks to computational photography. One downside of all iPhone 16 models is their pool flare management. As you can see here, you often get an ugly green dot in your photos when light sources reflect off the lens. Another advantage of having a telephoto lens is the extended reach for both photos and videos. This allows you to capture moments such as wildlife that would be difficult or even impossible without optical zoom. Another thing that I couldn't find on the iPhone 16e is the filters. On Apple on iPhone 16 Pro and also iPhone 16, I could easily add filters. They're really cool. There is presets and you can also change it later. But on the iPhone 16e, at least I couldn't find those filters that easily is available on other iPhone 16 models. For example, I took this picture using the amber color profile on both iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pro, but this option does not exist on the iPhone 16e. For indoor pictures, the difference is still not huge. The iPhone 16 Pro and iPhone 16 have a slightly more background blur due to large sensors compared to iPhone 16e. However, if you take a picture where background blur isn't present, where everything is in focus, you won't be able to tell the photos apart easily on these phones. At 5 times zoom indoors, the iPhone 16 Pro's colors appear slightly muted, but it captured more detail thanks to its dedicated telephoto lens. At 10 times zoom, the difference between the three phones becomes more visible. The iPhone 16e performs surprisingly well here, though its pictures is a bit contrasty and over-sharpened. The iPhone 16 also did a decent job, considering it lacks a telephoto lens. We see the same pattern at 12 times zoom. The iPhone 16e's picture is detailed and looks quite sharp. However, the iPhone 16's image appears softer, while the iPhone 16e's shot has more extra sharpening. For dynamic range, the iPhone 16 Pro and iPhone 16 produces similar results, but the clouds on the iPhone 16e are slightly overexposed. That said, in many situations like this one, the difference in dynamic range between the three phones using the main lens is quite minimal. It's even difficult to differentiate the images since their color science and image processing are very similar when using the main lens. iPhone 16e has sensor stabilization, but it does not have sensor shift stabilization. And that does make a big difference if you're moving and taking a video. As you can see here, the iPhone 16e's stabilization is wobbling compared to iPhone 16, and the overall quality isn't as good. So if you do a lot of vlogging or shoot while you're moving, you might want to consider something other than 16e. One advantage of the iPhone 16 Pro is its support for log format and Apple ProRes. This allows you to color grade your footage in post-production. For example, in this shot, the colors on the iPhone 16 Pro looks very different because I gave it a vintage film vibe through color grading. Since the iPhone 16 and 16e have similar sensor, their shutter speeds will be slower, meaning their photos may be slightly more blurry compared to the iPhone 16 Pro. However, if your subject isn't moving like this mannequin, the results will be very similar. The iPhone 16 and 16e will simply take a second longer to capture and properly expose the photo. At 2 times zoom, you can see that the iPhone 16e's image has a bit more noise compared to iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pro. That said, the difference isn't huge because computational photography and denoising algorithms remove a lot of visible grain from the image. The noise and lack of detail become more noticeable when zooming in, especially at 10 times, where the iPhone 16 Pro with its dedicated telephoto lens produces a much better image. The iPhone 16 also performs better than the 16e due to its larger sensor and improved light gathering capability. For low light video, the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max are the best options. These models are highly capable in nighttime conditions. In my experience, they can even compete with dedicated cameras. When we put the phones next to each other, you can notice that the iPhone 16 Pro has a slight edge in quality, followed by the iPhone 16 and iPhone 16e. But that's not surprising. That's how Apple designs the phones to fit different price brackets. For stabilization at night between the iPhone 16 Pro and iPhone 16e, since the 16e doesn't have sensor shiftless stabilization, the video is going to be shakier and wobblier on the 16e, even with very moderate walking. Overall, the iPhone 16e has a decent camera. There are a few quirks, like the lack of advanced filters, no cinematic mode, and having only one lens that also does not have sensor shifted stabilization. But Apple's computational photography makes other problems disappear. The iPhone 16 has a better main sensor and also has an ultra-wide lens, but it lacks log for video and telephoto sensor. The main sensor of the iPhone 16 Pro is larger than the other two. It supports Apple log and it also has a decent 5x telephoto sensor. If you enjoyed this video, you can watch the day in the life comparison of iPhone 16 versus iPhone 16e next. Thanks for tuning into Techmo, and I will see you in the next one.